Sometimes you need distance. In this video, I'm going to be talking about step number 8, which is regarding taking distance as a manipulation tactic or an influence other people tactic. And this basically means that you go into a type of Cold War. Now, I want to start first by analyzing this idea of the Cold War because it was very much so that before, whenever there was military tension between nations or between armies, they would just battle, right? Like physically, brute force. But the Cold War, due to the nuclear threat of mass destruction, basically turned everything into an intelligence war, right? Where now you had to collect information, you had to know about the other person's intentions, what they planned on doing, what they would be learning, what they would be developing, like the nuclear arsenal during the 60s, 70s, 80s, all of that stuff. And the term Cold War refers to the cold shoulder, which is basically like ignoring the person, right? But it's not ignoring them like completely. It is because you are resentful or because you have something against that person. So it is a conflict at the end of the day, but it's a cold conflict. It's not hot, it's not fire, it's not battling it out physically, brute force. It's actually just like ignoring everything, right? So this kind of goes hand in hand with the tip, which is this step. So when there's a Cold War with the other side, especially when you cannot get through to the other person, people will tend to maybe gather intelligence. Now, this is just kind of something interesting that I was thinking about, where let's say you stop talking to someone and they no longer have access to you for information regarding yourself or whatever you're going through with in your life. They're probably going to talk to people that know you, right? To get that information. So it kind of this process, I guess, is very natural, because I mean we know it on a world scale, on a global scale, like with the Cold War. But I mean, this happens like with everyday relationships, right? Like, let's say you get angry at someone, you stop talking to that person, and when you stop talking to that person will look for information with common friends, right? With maybe people that know you and that person knows, to gather information, right? Like, hey, do you know what's wrong with, that person? Like, can you fill me in on? So like naturally you're going to, or that other person is going to, we tend to gather that information, right? We tend to gather intelligence. Now, in order for this to really be effective, because I think I've seen a lot of cases where people will say, yes, I'm going to apply the cold shoulder rule. And when I do this, I'm going to stop talking to that person, but then all of a sudden they start talking to me, and I'm back in the loop again. I'm answering, or I'm not really talking to them, but I am helping them with this, situation or whatever. And that, at the end of the day, you're still talking, right? So the tip here is to block all communication. So you really don't read, you don't even open the messages, for instance. You don't read the messages, you don't accept the calls, you don't reply at all for any reason, and you even block if necessary, right? So you get to that practical way of doing things where you're really physically and communication regards, or communication wise, you're blocking that person. You really and genuinely are distancing yourself from that person knowingly, right? You don't let that other person start talking to you again through these type of little, oh, I have a problem with this, can you help me with this? Or, oh, hey, we need to talk regarding this other issue that concerns the both of us. No, I mean, like, you just block off all communication. You don't have any of that, well, I need to talk to this person just for this reason. No, like, just block it all off. So it's these type of practical things that you do to distance yourself from that person, right? Or from the group. So this means that you're going to go silent, right? And not talk to the other party. And inevitably, this will kind of get the other party I'm going to use party, but it could be a person or a group of people. It will inevitably get them to reflect on their wrongdoings, sometimes possibly even ones that you haven't considered or told them, right? This may be the thing that could bring about change. Eventually you're going to have to talk to them, because first of all, they're going to be confused, especially if you haven't told them why. They may have an idea. If they really do think, they may know why, but most people don't know why, because they don't like to think. They just see that you stop talking to them, and it's like, what's happening here? So they're going to be confused. You're going to have a plan to talk to them again, or at least think about when to reconnect or when to make contact with the other party again, right? So a plan could be, for example, I'm going to write them a message, right? Or I'm going to write them a letter, um, excuse me, explaining yourself, right? Explaining everything that has been happening with you. In this case, it's very important to use I statements, so you don't want to accuse the other person. I mean, you are going to accuse them, but you want to make it seem, and in fact, it is true that it's coming from you, right? That you're the one that is having these problems. You're viewing these things, right? And you want the other person to make these changes, but at the end of the day, it's not going to be up to you whether they make the changes or not, right? That's going to be up to them. So the only thing that you can do is basically tell the person using I statements, like, I feel upset when you do this, right? Or I feel sad, or I feel angry, or this makes me angry when you do this, right? Like, just so that person knows that you're the one that has those problems, right? It's not the other person, it's you, right? Kind of like that sense. And this is like, the technique is kind of like, in manipulation, the love bombing technique. So the love bombing technique is a manipulation technique which can be used when, for instance, you say, okay, I'm gonna bomb this person with love, right? I'm gonna be really nice, and I'm gonna go the extra mile for this person or for this group. So you commit, you're really there for whatever they need, and then you retract. You pull away. Just how you approach that person, like, completely. Now you retract completely, right? So that person is gonna be left with a sensation of emptiness, like something's missing. Like you're gonna create that I miss you in that person, right? So the thing here that then you can use, but again, this is kind of going back to that step where I mentioned that if you do use these dirty tactics, they could have, like, unstable or unpredictable consequences in the future. You really can't control these type of things, and the perception that people are going to have about you after you do these type of things, they're going to catch on eventually in the long run, and they're gonna view you as a manipulator and a bad person, right? So when you do this, you threaten them basically with not coming back, to that love bombing, right? Like, I'm not gonna come back unless, and that's where you throw that, transformation in, unless you do these, unless you generate these changes, right? Unless you transform yourself, right? Yeah, so unless they change. Now, like I mentioned, this could get dirty. It's unpredictable, but it is used as a last resort, or a last resort, when you feel overwhelmed, right? When it's just too much, when you have tried to listen, to establish rapport, to be a nice person, right? And just know that you always have this in your arsenal. It's the ultimatum option, and this is actually this is a natural step. I mean, when you're trying to fix things with the other party, and you've been there, so it's not like love bombing, because you haven't been there completely, but you have been there. And then when you retract from that, when you pull away completely, right, when you give the silent treatment, then that's when you can offer your ultimatums, right? Like, these are my problems, and I'm not coming back unless you make these changes. So I wanted to throw in another tip here, which I have been talking about in some of my videos, and thinking about this idea that you have to understand that people speak for two reasons. People speak because they want to, and because they need to. Now, most people that I encounter in my life are people that only speak when they need to speak, right? They normally don't speak. And this is because speaking requires mental ability. It requires for people to think. When you speak, you need to have thought about things, right? Unless you're very good at improvising and you can just start talking about whatever you want. But you need to have thought about what you're saying beforehand, right? And a lot of people just don't think, or maybe they do think, but you need to rethink about that when you're speaking, and many people don't like to rethink, right? So there are people that will talk because they need to, for example, when they need to make instrumental exchanges, practical things, right? Like if you're at work and your coworker is there and you're like, hey, did you finish the report? Or where is the stapler, right? Or hey, can you do me this favor at 3 p.m.? Can you go and talk to Jeremy about whatever, right? That's because you need to talk. You need to communicate information that is essential to get other things done, right? Or you need to know about things that are happening, right? That's when people need to talk, and that's basically the only time when people do talk. Now, talking when you want to talk, that's different because that's more of the extensive or fun. That's not so much instrumental. That's genuinely because you want to talk. So you start talking about, like ideas, like what do you think of the big five personality traits? What do you think of the Myers-Briggs personality traits test? Do you think there are people that are active and passive or not? Why? And you have like these discussions, excuse me, but genuinely because you want to, because you like to, right? Now, for that, again, you need to be a thinker. You need to think, and this kind of goes back to step 2 and knowing how to communicate. So we can add that, we can pin that in there also. Yeah. So the thing here that we need to remember is that people that want to talk are easier to influence. They're easier to manipulate because they are thinking, they have ideas, so they're able to not only listen to your ideas but actually think about them, right? This is different than the people that need to think, because the people that need to think aren't going to think about your ideas. You can come at them with your ideas, right? But they're harder to influence because they're not thinking. They're not going to change, right? So they may listen to you, they may hear you, not listen to you. They may just hear you and kind of on the surface understand what you're saying. They're not going to comprehend. They're just going to understand, and they're going to kind of push that to the back and whatever, like I don't really care. But the people that want to talk, right, that want to speak, they're going to be people that are going to be thinking about what you're saying. And when you think about what other people are saying, that inevitably starts to create changes and transformations, right? So I'm thinking that it's easier to influence people that want to speak, right? You as a magician, I as a magician archetype, or manifesting this archetype, will inevitably be people that want to speak, that want to change, that want to transform others as much as they want to transform themselves, right? But for the people that only speak when they need to speak, this could be applied to them, right? This whole silent treatment thing that we're talking about. So yeah, people that want to speak are easier to influence. People that only speak when they need to speak have to experience that attention first. That is a way of doing it, that love bombing, like attention first, then the distance to make them change, right? To kind of like threaten them with that, in order to effectively influence them so they can carry out the changes, right? You threaten them with that ultimatum of like, I'm retreating. This is the ultimatum idea, like I mentioned. This is an idea in negotiation. One of my best friends told me, like, the best tool to have in a negotiation is that retreating process. Like, you know what, then I'm out. I'm not gonna be here. You just lost me. So that is the ultimatum idea, right? And the big thing that you have to know here is that you're not gonna bluff. If you bluff, that's just, don't do that. You can't bluff with this, because if the other person calls your bluff, or then they say, well, I'm just gonna retreat, and you don't retreat, they got you, right? Then they got you, right? Because now it's like you use that for yourself, but now you just gave them the advantage, right? Because they know they got you, right? Let's say you give them the ultimatum option, but you're not serious, right? And you're like, okay, it's either my way or the highway. I'm out. And then the other person says, well, yeah, leave. I don't care. I'm out too. And they leave. And then you're like, no, 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 wait. I was just kidding. Then they know that it's more important for you and they got you, right? So you got to be careful not to use that as a bluff. You really have to mean it, right? Like, okay, I'm out. Okay, I'm out too. All right, bye. And just leave, right? But yeah, only use that as a last resort or when the situation is dire, awry, or worrisome, when it makes you anxious, when the situation makes you feel bad, basically, right? When you're anxious because of everything. Now, the idea of need versus want on speaking is because, like I mentioned, it requires thinking. And people that speak because they want to speak are thinkers naturally. So they're more prone to listen to those ideas and also adapt and change, right? Okay, and finally, the last point here that I want to discuss is that many people use illnesses, right? Sickness. They'll use these illnesses and sickness sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously, as a way to manipulate people. Now, these illnesses can be mental, emotional, physical, right? But at the end of the day, through these illnesses, they'll manipulate people, right? So they'll, if someone has some disease or some illness or something, everybody kind of has to tend to that person, right? So they kind of have a power, right, where they can basically like move people, bend people to their will, right? And this goes for the actions that they're doing as much as for the ideas that they may have on certain things, right? So you can kind of work with that. Again, it's a nasty thing to do. It's dirty. So you would want to use this as a last resort. I don't think many people use it consciously, but they are affecting other people when they do this, right, with their illnesses. And the worst thing about this is that those type of people normally never get better, right? They just stay sick because, I don't know if it's because they truly are sick or because they see that it benefits them in so many ways. They get so much attention, they get so much help, so much aid, right? So many people around them bending to their will that, or not all of the time, but they are giving them a lot of power that they just say, hey, I like this. I'd rather be sick because it's helping me out in life. It's making my life more comfortable, right? And I'm able to kind of dictate what others can think and do, right? So again, you can use this. It is dirty, but you could use it, and it's the same thing as saying like, this does make me feel bad. I think it's more proper to distance yourself if it's making you feel bad, right? Than to actually sit there and deliberately try to manipulate people by telling them like, hey, change because this is making me feel bad. Change because this is making me feel bad. Change because this is making me feel bad, right? You don't want to do that. So I think the best thing is just to step away, see if they're willing to make the change, because that is a change you want to create, right? That is the way you want to create change in other people, by them making the decision. And if they're not willing to make the decision as a last resort, then just simply step away, right? Or just, distance yourself, right? So that's all I got for this video, step 8. Hope you enjoyed it. And I'll see you in the next video. So peace.